This video is sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. More about this amazing service, as well as how you can get your own free trial, later on in the video. Welcome back to yet another video on the history of ancient Greece. In this episode, we'll take a look at the span of Greek history that historians call the Archaic Period. So without further ado, let's begin. In the 8th century BC, around the time when the Greek Dark Age was ending, archaeologists and historians believe that two major trends were taking place within the Greek world. One was that many Greek peoples began to organize themselves into what was called a polis, and the second was that many of them began to adopt the Phoenician alphabet, eventually coming up with a modified version of it for their own purposes. We'll come back to the polis a bit later. Let's first talk about the importance of the alphabet. As we discussed in the last episode, during the Greek Dark Age, knowledge of writing in the Mycenaean script of Linear B had been lost. By adopting and then modifying the Phoenician alphabet, Greeks could do more than simply just jot down account data. They could record their own history. Before the adoption of the alphabet, tales of the past were transmitted to succeeding generations orally, usually in poetic form. In the 8th or 7th century BC, the Greek poet Homer is presumed to have compiled the great epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey into one standardized version, which shortly afterward was written down in the new Greek alphabet. Thus, what was once a very fluid, oral tradition was codified into a single version that now, with the new writing system, could be easily distributed all over Greece. The importance and influence of the Iliad and the Odyssey on Greek civilization cannot be overstated. Centered around the events of the Trojan War, these epic poems connected the Greeks to a heroic past and nurtured a shared sense of identity amongst them, even though they may have been politically fragmented at the time. Along with being great stories, they also taught the ancient Greeks universal lessons with regard to courage, temperance, the value of upholding one's word, reputation, honor, and as stated in the Odyssey, that virtue is a better policy than vice. For the ancient Greeks of the Archaic period, the tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey were authentic history in poetic form. As mentioned earlier, it was towards the end of the Dark Age and into the Archaic period that the polis developed, and by 700 BC had emerged as a fundamental institution within Greek society. A polis was basically a city-state that encompassed a large town or city and its surrounding countryside. At some meeting point within each polis, usually a hill or central structure such as a marketplace, its respective residents would assemble for political, social, economic, cultural, and religious activities. Over time, each polis consisted of a social hierarchy of citizens with varying degrees of political rights. Citizens of each polis, even those with limited rights, were expected to be loyal to their state. Polis unity was of utmost importance. On a macro level, this loyalty came at a cost because it hampered overall Greek unity by dividing the country into fiercely independent little city-states that would often fight with each other over land and resources. Though Homer's great epics may have given the Greeks a shared historical past and some cultural solidarity, this was not enough to unite them politically into a single state. Not only were cities evolving, but so too was warfare. In the past, battles in Greece were generally fought by aristocrats and large landowners on horseback, for they were the ones who dominated the politics of the polis. However, by the end of the 8th century BC, this was largely replaced by heavily armed infantrymen wearing bronze or leather helmets along with breastplates and armed with short swords, shields, and spears that could be 8 or 9 feet in length. These types of warriors were known as hoplites. Extremely effective in battle, hoplites marched in a very tight formation called a phalanx, where each soldier's shield overlapped the shield of the soldier next to him, leaving few places for enemy weapons to break through. As long as they stayed in this phalanx formation, hoplites were pretty difficult to defeat on the battlefield, unless they were outflanked. Hoplites were also deemed to be of higher status than traditional soldiers. They owned their weapons, which in those days would have been pretty expensive. Ordinary soldiers and archers generally came from the lower classes, and so could not afford to possess the armor and weapons that hoplites routinely carried. There was a lot of prestige tied to being a hoplite. The Spartan poet Tyrtaeus, writing in the 7th century BC, wrote admiringly of their courage and abilities. For those who, standing shoulder to shoulder, dare to come to close quarters and to fight amongst the foremost, fewer die, and they preserve those behind them. All of the courage of cowards is dissipated. Let each shake the mighty spear in his right hand, and the frightening crest upon his head. Let each learn by practice to do the mighty deeds of war, and not stand outside the range of missiles with shield in hand. Rather, everyone should close up to his man with his great spear or sword, and wound or kill his enemy. Standing leg to leg, resting shield against shield, crest beside crest, and helmet to helmet, having drawn near, let him fight his man with his sword or great spear. Now, I don't know about you, but I made a New Year's resolution to learn an ancient language. And since I'm doing this series on ancient Greece, why not learn ancient Greek? Lucky for me, the Great Courses Plus has a course specifically on ancient Greek. It's called Greek 101. Now, this is great because due to the current lockdown in my area, I can't go to a university to learn this. So the university and Professor Mueller of Union College in New York come to me. Greek 101 is a full 36-lecture course that covers everything I need to know to start reading ancient Greek primary sources and literature on my own. Not only this, but there are courses on ancient Hebrew, Latin, even Egyptian hieroglyphics. I mean, it's pretty awesome. So what exactly is the Great Courses Plus? Let's check it out. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription on-demand learning service with some of the best lectures and courses from top professors from Ivy League and other great universities globally, as well as experts from places such as National Geographic, the Smithsonian, even the Culinary Institute of America. Through your subscription, you get access to a huge library of over 11,000 video lectures about anything that interests you, like history, science, math, literature, or skills like web design or video editing. The Great Courses Plus has something for every lover of history. So check it out on your TV, computer, tablet, or any streaming device, including your mobile phone, where you can download the lectures and listen to them as if they were podcasts. So, give the gift of knowledge or start your own journey with a free trial of the Great Courses Plus today. To start your free trial, click the link in the video description. During the Archaic Period, war had become part of life in Greece. There were frequent battles for land and resources. Since about 75% of mainland Greece is made up of mountains, good farmland was relatively scarce in those days, and so the citizens of a polis wouldn't hesitate to go to war if they felt that their food supply was in jeopardy. Despite the frequency of war in Archaic Greece, large battles were unusual, and most tended to be brief, often not lasting more than an afternoon, which both limited casualties as well as any physical damage to property. As various Greek city-states began to prosper, overpopulation became a problem, and so many of them sent citizens abroad to form colonies. The first Greek colony to be founded was Cumae in southern Italy around 750 BC. Not too long after that, in 734 BC, the colony of Syracuse was established on the island of Sicily. In fact, within 2 centuries, hundreds of Greek colonies had been established all throughout the Mediterranean Sea in places as diverse as modern-day Italy, France, Spain, Libya, and Cyprus. There were also a great number of colonies established around the Black Sea. Establishing colonies not only helped to curb overpopulation on the mainland, but also created new markets for Greek goods and vice versa. If a colony was successful, which generally meant that it could provide surpluses of grain, fish, timber, and useful metals, it would then send a portion of this to the Greek mainland or the mother colony, and in exchange receive finished goods such as pottery, wine, and olive oil. So, while initially colonies may have started due to overpopulation, eventually increased trading opportunities also motivated people to emigrate far from their homeland. Not everyone left voluntarily though. For example, the citizens of Thera, who established the colony of Kyrene in what's today modern Libya, only left after their island home could no longer support them after several long years of drought. According to an inscription, the people of Thera consulted the Oracle of Delphi, where the reply was given that it was necessary for many of them to leave and form a colony. If anyone chosen for resettlement to the new colony refused to leave, then they would face the death penalty. In the case of Kyrene, the colony was ultimately very successful and was able to supply its home polis, Thera, with ample supplies of grain. Colonies also benefited mainland Greece in another way, with the exchange of ideas. Through colonization and trade, the Greeks came into contact with other cultures, most notably the Phoenicians, from whom they were introduced to writing using an alphabet. In fact, the earliest form of written Greek, using the modified Phoenician alphabet, came from colonies in what's today Naples in southern Italy. By 500 BC, the population of mainland Greece began to increase once again, but this time, so too did the divisions between society's rich and poor. On the one end, you had the aristocracy who owned the best or the most land within their respective polis. They were joined by a new merchant class that had grown extremely wealthy from international trade. On the other end, you had many poor farmers who were gradually falling into increased debt, especially during times when their harvests weren't doing so well. Even with a decent harvest, they still faced competition from the grain exporting colonies abroad, which drastically brought down the price of their own crops. The aristocrats eventually formed oligarchies that ultimately repressed the poor and forced many of these highly indebted farmers into slavery. Enter the tyrants. Now, I know what you're thinking. A tyrant is a bad person, one who oppresses others. And that's true with our modern usage of the word, but in ancient, archaic Greece, a tyrant was anyone who seized power by force and was not subject to the law. They often came from wealthy aristocratic families, which allowed them to buy the allegiance of mercenaries, and then seize power by staging a local coup in their respective polis. They also generally received support from the wealthy merchants of the polis who were not part of the aristocracy, as well as poor peasants, who really had gained nothing from the traditional oligarchy of aristocrats that pretty much abused them. Once in charge, tyrants often benefited the polis by using their power and influence to build new marketplaces, temples, housing, patronize the arts, and perhaps most importantly, cancel many of the debts that the lower echelons of society had racked up. Such actions made certain tyrants very popular amongst the locals. However, they could often do great harm. Well-known examples of both good and bad tyrants come from the city of Corinth. During the 8th and early 7th century BC, Corinth was one of the most prosperous states in Greece, under an oligarchy controlled by the Bacchiad family. However, they were cruel and very unpopular with the people. Along came Kypselus, who was actually a member of the ruling family, though a lower-ranking one. He staged a coup, assumed control of Corinth, and actually ended up being such a great ruler and so well-liked that he didn't even need bodyguards. During his tyranny, Corinth prospered even more by exporting vast quantities of pottery and founding new colonies to expand its commercial interests abroad. However, Kypselus' son, Periander, who assumed control of Corinth after his father's death, was the exact opposite. He was cruel, hated, and when he died, the people decided not to give his son a chance, and so they killed him before he could assume power. Within a short time, there was a new oligarchy ruling over Corinth. Now, this is just a story. I do want to point out that the historical Periander was a very capable ruler, and the stories with regard to his cruelty may have been concocted by the nobility with whom he had dealt with harshly in the past. There are several similar stories of the rise and fall of tyrants from other Greek cities as well. The fall of tyrants in such places eventually opened up the doors for more people within various Greek city-states to shape their own communities. These results, though, were mixed. In some places, you had the beginnings of democracy. In others, just an expanded oligarchy. Many places had something in between. It's all really fascinating stuff, but let's save it for another time. During the next few months, I'll be releasing a lot of content on ancient Greek history, so if you're interested, make sure to subscribe. As always, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank GrandKeg69, Pasta Frola, Michael Lewis, Tobias Winder, and all of the channel's patrons on Patreon for helping to support this and all future content. Check out the benefits to being a Patreon member, and if you'd like to join, feel free to click the link in the video description. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as listen to special podcast episodes on the History with Sai podcast. Thanks again, and stay safe.